So I've had a nice little break in Lewes, and now I'm going to continue along the River Ouse now. There's a footpath which follows the River Ouse down to Southease, and there's a bridge when I get to Southease, and that's where I get onto the South Downs Way again. So now for the next hour or so, I'm just following the footpath which follows the Ouse, so it's a nice easy walk. I think it's going to be quite dry today, but I think it's going to rain tonight, but I'll be in my tent by then, so no problem. So today's itinerary, I'm walking about 4 miles along the river down to Southease, and then at Southease I'll be back on the South Downs Way, and I'll be heading up to Fell Beacon, which is 217 metres above sea level, and then from there I'll be heading down into Alfriston, and then just after Alfriston there's a wood where I'll be camping tonight, and then tomorrow morning I'll be walking along the coast into Eastbourne. I've just arrived at the bridge, so this is where I go back onto the South Downs Way and start heading up into the hills again. Nice view looking back towards Lewes over in the distance. So I can see why the Normans built a castle here, because this valley going through the South Downs would have been quite an important transport route. So I'm just heading towards the Fell Beacon, hope to be there in about an hour or so. I think this is Beddingham Hill I've just arrived at, but the views are really starting to open up now. And from here I can see where I'll be going today and tomorrow. I'm going in this direction. I can just make out where the Seven Sisters will be, just over in the distance. So I'll be heading over there tomorrow. But yeah, very scenic up here, so I'm hoping it'll stay sunny for the rest of the morning. So next stop is Fell Beacon. Just arrived at Fell Beacon. This is 217 metres above sea level, and this is the highest point I'll be walking today. So now it's just all downhill to Alfriston, which is just down in the valley. It's getting a bit breezy and chilly now, so I'm going to head down towards Alfriston and have a little break there, and then carry on towards the woods. Just approaching Alfriston. It's just down in the valley. Just one little problem, it's still quite early. It's only 11 o'clock in the morning, and so by the time I get into the wood where I'm planning to camp tonight, it'll still only be about 1 o'clock, which is far too early to camp. So what I might do when I get to Alfriston is just catch the bus into Eastbourne and spend the afternoon in Eastbourne, and then just come back to Alfriston tomorrow and then continue from there. So I should be down in the village in about 10 minutes or so. I've just arrived in the centre of Alfriston, which is quite a pretty little village. So I'm just going to go over to the bus stop now and find out the next bus into Eastbourne, and then I'm going to have a quick cup of coffee in the village centre, because there's a couple of very nice tea shops here. Slight change of plan again. There's no bus tomorrow morning back to Alfriston until about 11 o'clock, so I'm carrying on to Westdean, which is another couple of miles down, and there's a much more regular bus service between Westdean and Eastbourne, so it's about another hour's walk along the South Downs Way. Just over in the distance, I can just make out a chalk mural of a horse. I think that one is called the Litlington White Horse. But in this part of England, there's several of these chalk murals, and a lot of them are quite ancient. So I hope to see some more while I'm on my travels. But I'm just approaching Westdean. I'm about a mile away from the village. Just getting to the end of today's walk. I think the bus stop is just down here. This is the Seven Sisters car park that I'm just approaching. So I'm going to go down and hopefully the bus will turn up. So I'm going to go to Eastbourne now and see how my video turned out, and then come back here tomorrow morning. So until then, good night. Back on the trail again. So from here I'm walking up to the Seven Sisters, which of course are the famous group of white cliffs just to the west of Eastbourne. So I'm hoping it's going to clear up today, so I hope to take some really good photographs while I'm up there. So I'm just heading to Eastbourne and then to Pevensey, and that's where I'll be calling it a day for today. I think that's the Cuckmere River. That's just meandering down to the sea. I've just arrived at the cliffs. I think the best view of the Seven Sisters is at Burling Gap, which is at the other end of where the cliffs are. So I'll be there in about an hour or so, and then I should hope to get some good photographs. I've just arrived at Brass Point, which is the halfway point along the Seven Sisters, and there's a bench here so I can have a nice little rest. I can see in the distance Bell Toot Lighthouse, and that's the far end of the Seven Sisters, so I'm hoping to get some good views when I get up to there. Just arrived at Burling Gap, so I'm just going to have a little break here and then continue to Eastbourne. It's just 4 miles to Eastbourne from here, so making good time. There's a shop and cafe here, but it's not open for another half an hour, so I'm not going to bother stopping for a coffee. So I'm just going to go and have a look at the Seven Sisters from the viewpoint. So from here, it's just a short walk uphill to Beltoot Lighthouse. Really nice view at the top of the next cliff. So Beltoot just at the top of the hill. Just arrived at Beltoot Lighthouse. It's been decommissioned for a while because of the, I think it's to do with the erosion of the cliffs. And according to the app, my hiking app, it was actually, they tried moving it at one point. It said it was moved 17 meters away from the cliff face. But it's now out of use. But I know there's the new Beachy Head lighthouse further down the coast, so I'll be seeing that pretty soon. So I think Beachy Head is the next stop. I'm just approaching Beachy Head now. I can just see the Beachy Head lighthouse down at the foot of the cliffs. That was built in 1902, so I guess that was to replace Beltoot Lighthouse. I'm just approaching Beachy Head. So this is a beauty spot. I think it's quite a high point just before Eastbourne. So it's quite popular with day trippers. I think there's a cafe over there, so if it's open I'm going to have a quick break, and then it's just all downhill into Eastbourne. Just arrived at the top of Beachy Head and I can just see Eastbourne coming into view. So should be down in Eastbourne in about half an hour or so. Just arriving in Eastbourne. So at the bottom of this hill is the end of the South Downs Way. And then I'm going to continue over to the pier for a little break and then continue on to Pevensey. Just reached the end of the South Downs Way, so now it's just a mile or so down to the pier where I'll have a little break and then on to Pevensey for the start of the 1066 country walk. And this is the very picturesque Eastbourne Pier. I've got a hotel booked again in Eastbourne, so I'm just going to walk to the far end of the town and then call it a day for today, and then go back to my hotel. And then in the morning I'm just going to take the bus back to where I stopped and then carry on to Pevensey. So I'm going to have a nice break this afternoon by the beach. So until tomorrow morning, good night. Just arrived in Pevensey, so now I'm just on my way to the castle, which is the start of the 1066 country walk. So these are the ancient ruins of Pevensey Castle. So Pevensey Castle guarded a very important landing point for people travelling from France to England. The Romans recognised the value of Pevensey and they built a fort here in around 290 AD, and they based a fleet here. And then when William the Conqueror landed in 1066, he reused the Roman fort and he built a castle here. And the castle was then used for hundreds of years, and it had 4 sieges, and was, over the years, it was adapted for modern warfare. The Roman walls formed the castle's outer bailey, while the most important medieval buildings were grouped in the inner bailey. So I'm just going to go over to the main part of the medieval castle. So this is the main gatehouse of the castle. Must have looked very impressive when it was first built. It's closed at the moment, but I want to sort of start making progress towards battle this afternoon, so I'm just going to have a quick look from the outside and then look for the 1066 footpath. So the first part of the walk is following this river towards Hurstmonceux Castle. I think the river is called the Pevensey Haven. So of course 1066 is a very famous date in English history. That was the date of the Battle of Hastings between Harold, King of England, and William the Conqueror from Normandy. And the events leading up to the Battle of Hastings began on January the 5th, 1066, with the death of the King of England, Edward the Confessor. So the problem was that Edward the Confessor didn't have any children, he didn't have any heirs to the throne. So it was down to there was a council, a special council of advisors to the king called the Witan, and they had to decide who would be the next King of England. And there were 4 claimants to the throne. So Edward the Confessor's nearest relative was a young chap called Prince Edgar, and he was the great nephew of King Edward the Confessor, but he was only 15 at the time. And the second claimant was the Earl of Wessex, and that was Harold Godwin's son, and he was Edward's brother-in-law, King Edward's brother-in-law, and he was also an advisor to the king. And another claimant to the throne was the King of Norway, King Harold, who's the king of the Vikings, and he claimed that his father had been promised by Edward the Confessor that he could be the King of England, and his father died, so King Harold of Norway said that he was the natural claimant to the throne. And the 4th claimant to the throne was William, Duke of Normandy, and he was a distant cousin of Edward the Confessor. So the Witan decided that Harold, the Earl of Wessex, would become King of England, and he was crowned immediately on January the 6th. And when news of this reached the King of Norway and William, Duke of Normandy, they were both very angry about it, and they both decided to raise armies and travel to England and take the English crown by force. So a huge Viking army sailed down from Norway to England, and they sailed up the Humber River towards York. They were going to try and take this town of York, and the northern English barons, they raised an army and they travelled down from York to meet the Viking army, and the two armies met just south of York at a place called Fulford. And so on the 20th of September there was a huge battle at Fulford, and the Vikings won it. And when King Harold heard about this, he was quite angry about it. He decided to try and stop the Vikings before they could travel any further. He raised an army in the south and he marched up to the north quite quickly. The Viking army, they had gone to a place called Stamford Bridge, and what I read online, they were going to do a prisoner swap. And while they were waiting for the English to turn up, they weren't expecting the King Harold's large army to arrive, and so they were taken by surprise. And so on the 25th of September there was a large battle at Stamford Bridge, and King Harold won that, and I think the King of Norway, he was killed. So while the fighting was going on up in the north of England, William, Duke of Normandy, also raised an army, and he sailed over from Normandy to the south coast of England. And on the 28th of September he landed at Pevensey Bay, and the army marched up to Pevensey Castle, which they temporarily fortified, and they stayed there the night. And then the next day they marched to Hastings. And when King Harold learnt that the Normans had landed at Hastings, he realised then that he would now have to march south again and take on the Normans. And so the English army, they marched south towards Hastings, and north of Hastings, a few miles north of the town, there's a hill, I think it's Colbeck Hill, but I'm going to find out when I get to Battle, and that's where the English army rallied and prepared to take on the Normans in battle. Unfortunately, nowadays it's not possible to follow the route that the Norman army took when they left Hastings to travel north, because I think nowadays it's mostly a very busy A road just to the east of here. There's a lot of high ground just to the east, and I think they would have travelled along there. Where I am now, this is the Pevensey levels, and this, 1,000 years ago, this would have been a very flooded area. I think it's been drained since then. So this would have been impassable back in 1066. This magnificent building is Hurstmonceau Castle, and this dates back to the 15th century. So work began on it in 1441, and it's one of the first buildings in the country that they used brick, and it was built by Flemish workers, and the brick was made from local clay. So from here it's about 11 miles to Battle, where I'll be staying tonight. Now this is a nice place to stop on a sunny day for a break. I've just arrived at the top of Tent Hill, and according to the information board, depending on which source you choose to believe, either the English or Norman army camped on Tent Hill the night before the Battle of Hastings. So I guess I must be getting quite close to Battle now. I've just arrived in the centre of Battle. So of course, as everyone knows, the Normans won the Battle of Hastings. On the morning of the 14th of October 1066, the English army would have come down from Colbeck Hill, just to the north of here, and they would have taken on the Normans just here. The battlefield is just on the other side of the abbey, and I would have liked to visit it, but unfortunately it closed at 4 o'clock. I think it's just gone 4 o'clock now. So the battle, it was won by the Normans. Both the armies, they were like evenly matched. I think there was about 7,000 soldiers in each army, but the Normans, they had the advantage of having a very large cavalry, and they also had a lot of archers and crossbowmen. And it was quite a long fought battle. It took up most of the day, but eventually they beat the English army, and King Harold was killed. And following the battle, William marched up to London with his army, and on Christmas Day 1066 William was crowned King of England. And following the construction of the abbey, a small town started to build up around the abbey, and today we have the very attractive town of Battle. So tonight I'm staying at the George Hotel, which is just on the High Street, so that's quite convenient. And then tomorrow morning I'll be continuing with the second part of the 1066 country walk, which is a 15-mile walk to Rye. So until then, good night.